Allow me first, on behalf of the Lao-Cuban Friendship Association, I would like to express my cordial appreciation and has the honor to participate the 6th Asia Pacific Regional Conference for Solidarity with Cuba to be held in Colombo, the beautiful land and famous of Sri Lanka, a friend of Cuba and Laos as a peace-loving people in the world. On this beautiful occasion, we would like to express our heartfelt congratulations to the Sri Lanka delegate for hosting the 6th Asia Pacific Regional for Solidarity with Cuba. Herewith, I would like to convey my sincere thanks to the host and ICAP for your warm welcome and provide us facility and full heart of friendship to our delegate. May I express my cordial congratulations to the delegation from Asia Pacific region for their attendance. The significant conference which show the power for solidarity with our brother Cuba for their struggling to the blockade of the hostile force for its independence and freedom. Distinguished delegate, guests, and friends, since the first Asia Pacific Regional Conference for Solidarity with Cuba in 1999, Solidarity with Cuba movement in this region had been strongly expanded and widely and become strong in political terms and foreign relations, supporting Cuban to structure for their Justice Friendship Association as well as Friendship Organization for Solidarity with Cuba has active movement in several shapes, several types to make the peace, just loving people in this region to aware and correct understand about the real situation and success in several sectors of Cuba to structure for the blockade. And we understand and realize that Cuba is just people, therefore struggling for its stability over 50 years again, or shape hosting of U.S. administration is a fighting for the just again injustice hostile because of this Cuban yen victory and has been supported by heard from progress movement, peace and just loving people across the world. Lao people highly considered for the victory of Cuban for their protection and construction its country. For 50 years ago, even Cuban has many difficulties and challenges because of blockade of or fear of U.S., but it cannot reduce the hurtful of revolution, braveness, and poor status of Cuban people in international. By fighting, Cuban not only protect its political system, economic and social to stabilize, but also strong and stronger and achieve many fields, particular education, healthcare, sport, culture, and international relations, which rise up the role of Cuba in the international arena. On this occasion, on behalf of Lao and all ethnic people, I would like to express my heartfelt congratulations for the great victory of brother Cuba, and I do believe that under the right leading of the Community Party of Cuba led by Comrade Fidel Castro and Raúl Castro, Cuba will gain a great achievement. Distinguished delegates and guests, Lao People Democratic Republic is one of the good friends of Republic of Cuba. Two countries, Lao and Cuba, have the same goal, have the same enemy, even have supported each other and mutual help during the struggle to liberate of our country, as well as protect and construct the country. Over 37 years ago, Lao People Democratic Republic always reaffirmed its correct, just foreign policy, peace, independence, friendships, and cooperation for development based on respect to independence, sovereignty, and not invasion to internal order.
We can all see that there is now a well-founded international commitment to increase economic growth and social inclusion as a way to reduce poverty and hunger in our globe and ultimately to consolidate peace and stability. However, we'd like to stress that a peaceful regional and world economic political cooperation should always imply respect for differences and for integrity of the national sovereignty, and a comprehensive dialogue in regional and international issues. We all are aware that this is the only way to overcome our differences and to reduce unnecessary tensions and conflicts. On behalf of the Parliament of Timor-Leste, I would like to reiterate once again this Timorese solidarity and support for Cuba and its amazing people. I would like to recall that on the 11th of May 2010, the National Parliament of Timor-Leste, which is the highest political decision maker, unanimously approved a resolution of solidarity and support to the people of Cuba and call for a constructive dialogue between the relevant parties in relation to the blockade. The resolution appealed for an immediate and unconditional lifting of the North American blockade of Cuba, as requested on many occasions by the General Assembly of the United Nations. A dialogue between the United States of America and the Republic of Cuba. A review of the situation of the 5 detainees in the United States, including their visitation rights by their respective families. We hope that this regional solidarity conference with Cuba will have a major impact on the solidarity movement around the world and especially in the United States. We, Timorese, have a profound admiration for the resilience of the Cuban people and of their leadership. Despite all difficulties associated with the USA economic blockade, the Cubans have been able to develop their country in a very unique and exemplary way. It is actually one of the most well-reputed countries in terms of Human Development Index in the world. It is one of the very few countries in the world that dispatches medical and educational teams to work with many countries with scarce resources with the aim to speed up their economic and social development. Let us unite efforts to free the Cuban people from all constrictions which do not enable them to speed up their socio-economic development. Let us support the development of Cuba and work together for the better world. Our solidarity with Cuba is a matter of principle. In Timor-Leste, there is an unanimous decision in relation to Cuba. In the parliament, when they speak about Cuba, there is an unanimous support. So it's a matter of principle for us to support this issue, to support Cuba against the economic blockade. We are here to recall that every country must comply with international law and the people's rights to self-determination. Viva el pueblo de la Cuba. Viva la solidaridad internacional. Thank you.
We are very, very deeply touched this morning of a silence of all participants paying respect to our late King Norodom Sihanouk. I would like to express also my deepest and heartfelt thanks to all delegations, to all eminent world leaders, as well as dearest friends for having sent and continuing to send huge condolence message to the Cambodian people. Our respected King Father had dedicated his whole life for saving without reserve his beloved people living in peace, unity, independence, and prosperity. The death of our King Father is the big loss of our nation and that of the world, seeing his noble role played in building and strengthening peace and stability regionally and internationally. Words fail to express how deeply saddened we are by the loss of our King Father. The economic blockade against Cuba affects the spirit of the people as well as the economy and national development of the whole Cuban nation. Therefore, those who impose sanctions against Cuba should consider, based on sensible judgment, lifting the economic blockage, imposing economic sanctions on any country equal to indirect killing of the people of that country and abuse the sovereignty of the state. On behalf of the Cambodian-Cuba Parliamentary Friendship Group delegation, I would like to express my deep gratitude to all the nations around the world which highly value our significant international contribution. In conclusion, I wish to praise the bonds of solidarity with Cuba, which are the bond of peace and cooperation between people all around the world. And I also wish to praise the strong spirit of struggle in the defense of national independence of the Cuban nation and the Cuban people. With the great support of the people around the world, the Cuban nation and its people will, of course, attain their justice. I visit the 6th Asia-Pacific Regional Conference of Solidarity with Cuba, SAC. Peace is seeking independence and freedom for the Cuban people who are affected by the abuse of their freedom, and wish this conference success, in particular, the presence of the Cuban delegation and all delegations attending today's conference, and best wishes forever. Thank you.
Year of 2011 was the 20th consecutive year of the United Nations Assembly passed the resolution condemning the U.S. trade embargo imposed against Cuba with 186 votes, only 2 votes against, and only 3 abstentions. This speaks to the fact that this embargo is not protested by the Cuban supporters, but also by the U.S. close allies. Not few groups of the countries at the General Assembly of the United Nations once again claim, as so many times before that, the embargo against Cuba has violated the fundamental rules of international law, international humanitarian law, and against the standards as well as the principle of the perfect harmony among nations. In 1961, the United States began to impose the economic blockade and embargo against Cuba. According to the latest statistics, for more than 50 years, the hostile policy by the US has caused the damage to more than 1,000 billion US dollars to Cuba. On this occasion, once again, we would like to express our deep sympathy and strong solidarity with the Cuban people who are suffering severe consequences of that irrational and injustice policy.
Our problem is that we are big. Friends tell us that we happen to be the biggest delegation from India. This is something which is historic. We cannot help it because ours is such a big country and it is so diverse. So if any solidarity movement has to be really representative in India, it has to be big. We cannot help it. But at the same time, we must tell you that solidarity with Cuba is one of the noblest and one of the most worthy cases of solidarity. We need solidarity for Cuba, maybe more for our own sake than Cuba needs our solidarity. Because we have been a colony and our people have fought colonialism. Therefore, we understand and we value and we cherish solidarity more than anything else. And today, in this challenging world, which is the theme of this conference, if anybody deserves solidarity, it is Cuba. We want to make this point very, very clear that about 53 years back, when the Cuban Revolution triumphed on the streets of Havana, and even before that, when the Batista regime tried to imprison Comrade Fidel Castro and his compatriots, he made this impassioned appeal and a declaration that history will observe them. And I think the gathering here today is more than a testimony that history has indeed absolved Comrade Fidel and his compatriots.
Today we are here to express our solidarity with the revolutionary Cuban people, their great struggle against the US imperialism and on safeguarding the red banner of the socialism. Nepal Workers' and Peasant Party has always condemned the cruel blockade imposed by US against the socialist Cuba and has always stood by revolutionary Cuban people. Needless to say, blockade is a crime against humanity. This blockade itself is a terrorist act imposed by a country supposedly fighting against world terrorism. Terrorism by any name must be denied. The lifting of the cruel blockade against Cuba and Democratic People's Republic of Korea is the beginning of a war against terrorism in the true sense. In fact, any war against terrorism is the presence of blockade is merely a myth. The US must lift the heinous blockade against Cuba immediately and unconditionally, and that will ensure peace in the Western Hemisphere and bring home more happiness and prosperity for the Cuban people. It is the only way to extend the 5 decades long war against humanity and will be a beacon of hope for the whole world. This is the wish and demand of the justice-loving people of the world, which has repeatedly been echoed in the United Nations. But it is the greatest irony that US, which considered itself the messiah of the world, has continuously denied to lift the blockade against Cuba.
Many people, including Ms. Aleida Guevara, came to encourage the people suffering pain. We anew appreciate the great activity based on the humanity of the Cuban socialism. In addition, the Sri Lanka ambassador to Japan himself provided meals to the earthquake victims at the stricken area. We do not know how fully we thank for the warm support by all of you. Thank you very much. In Japan, more than 20 organizations and groups having close friendship with Cuba are engaged in various activities, studies, cultural exchange such as music or dance, material support, for example. The image of Cuba for the Japanese people is a beautiful island country in the Caribbean Sea with beach of transparent and pure water, where happy, kind, and hospitable people live. But we Japanese are not informed enough of Cuba's more significant role in the world. We feel the Cuban social system suggests clues to the problems we are suffering from: ongoing destruction of our Earth due to global warming, wars around the world, general poverty, and many other problems. We strongly object to the United States, who is placing political and economic oppression against Cuba, and will strengthen the international solidarity.
I'm very much delighted to attend the 6th Asian Pacific Regional Conference of Solidarity with Cuba on behalf of Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, China Latin America and the Caribbean Friendship Association, and the China-Cuba Friendship Association. Here, please allow me to extend my highest respect to the heroic people of Cuba and my best wishes to the friends from all over the world present here today.
由于时间关系，下面请我的同事潇潇用英文继续发言。谢谢大家。
Now, in order to save the time, I'd like to invite my colleague Xiao Xiao to continue the speech in English. Thank you.
Está en manos seguras. Gracias.
Over the 51 years after the victory of a revolution, Cuba has been kept under hostility and the blockade of the superpower in the North, the United States of America. Such blockade caused tremendous difficulty to the daily life of Cuban people. What has done by the US government violated generally acknowledged international norms and was strongly condemned by the international community. Cuban people's just struggle against the economic blockade wins worldwide sympathy and support. At present, Cuba has established diplomatic relations with 184 countries worldwide, and the United Nations General Assembly has for 20 consecutive years voted in favor of the resolution requiring that the USA must end its economic trade and financial embargo against Cuba.
Cuba is a country which is far away from Bangladesh. In the globe, it is just diagonally opposite to our country. Our culture is different, our language is different, but still we support Cuba. Why? Because we have one thing in common. We feel oneness in our struggle against US imperialism. That is the common factor why we come here every year. As a matter of fact, Cuban people are fighting against US blockade, and our people, they're fighting against US economic blockade, economic exploitation, which is done through multinational companies. These US imperialists, they try to grab the entire world by their muscle power. And in the history of the world, we have seen this imperialist country has committed most heinous crimes in the world. Firstly, now they speak of the rights of indigenous peoples, but we have seen in the history that this US imperialist has annihilated the entire nation, the Red Indians. Secondly, they have reintroduced slavery in their country, which was a history, but we see it was done by US imperialists. Finally, now they speak of disarmament. In our country, we see that every day in papers, we see that US imperialists, they are saying Iran cannot hold nuclear power, North Korea cannot hold nuclear power, like that. But when Israel can hold nuclear power, US himself can hold nuclear power, what the harm in those countries to hold nuclear power.
The last 50-year-long history of Cuban Revolution was a history of proud victory that safeguarded socialism gains against all kinds of challenges of enemies at home and abroad, and defended the national sovereignty and freedom of people, and the history of brilliant victory that gave a deadly blow to the US imperialists for the first time in Latin America. Thanks to the correct leadership of Comrade Fidel Castro, the supreme leader of the Cuban Revolution, it was able to record victory after victory and successfully overcome all kinds of challenges and isolating and stifling maneuvers of the imperialists. The US blockade against Cuba after the victory of the revolution was a very cruel one, unprecedented in the history, but the Cuban people have persuaded all the road of socialism without the slightest vacillation. Despite the strong demands of a lot of countries around the world, the unilateral US blockade against Cuba in the field of economy, trade, and financial affairs have been continuing for over 50 years. It is without doubt that the blockade carried out under the pretext of accelerating the democratic transition of Cuba are aimed at overturning the social system of Cuban government and its people. The US unilateral and brutal blockade against Cuban revolution caused tremendous financial losses to various sectors of Cuban economy while seriously affecting social welfare and life of the Cuban people. The US blockade against Cuba is a silent war against the Cuban people, is the act that have no grounds in terms of political, legal, and moral aspect.
I bring warm fraternal greetings from the Philippine-Cuban Friendship Society, the Philippine Committee for the Freedom of the Cuban Five, as well as from the Philippine Peace and Solidarity Council. Cuba and the Philippines have shared close historical ties, being both colonies of Spain for 300 years and also colonies of the United States for many years. While Cuba has won independence and has embarked on the socialist path since the triumph of the revolution in 1959, the Philippines has remained under the orbit of US imperialism, unfortunately. Nevertheless, the numerous friends of Cuba in the Philippines are active in solidarity with Cuba against the US blockade of Cuba and for the freedom of the Cuban Five. We meet in a very auspicious occasion with the recent victory of President Hugo Chavez in the October 7th election in Venezuela. It is, of course, no joke that the reactionaries who fought against him have warned that they will stop their oil exports to Cuba and that they will they'll send back to Cuba the Cuban doctors and teachers in case they win the election. Of course, it is a great victory for President Hugo Chavez, and with this re-election, the socialist path of Venezuela is assured. And more than that, the future of ALBA is also assured. The future of the new CELAC is to be strengthened, as well as the strengthening of Telesur is also assured.
무엇보다도 우리는 쿠바의 정신과 노력에 대해서 모든 인민들이 알고 있습니다. 바로 이 아시아 태평양의 조직을 통해서 이러한 것을 실천하고 있다는 것을 알고 있습니다. 특별히 쿠바는 바로 라틴 아메리카에 지지하고 라틴 아메리카 센터 학교 같은 것을 만들어서 그런 연대를 보여준 좋은 예가 된다고 생각합니다.
Above all things, we should let all the people know the effort and spirit of Cuba. Then we have to practice those things through the Asian Pacific organizations. Especially, Cuba becomes a good example as practice of solidarity for their nation with Latin American Medical School that is supported by Latin America.
지금 우리 아시아에는 많은 어려움이 있습니다. 그리고 그런 것 중에서 한 가지가 바로 1차 보건의료에 대한 보급입니다. 그래서 제가 제안하고자 하는 것은 바로 라틴 아메리카 의과대학의 아시아 풍소처럼 아시아 공동체 의과대학을 북한에 건설했으면 합니다. 우리는 이러한 것을 통해서 쿠바의 정신을 전 세계에 보급하고 알리고자 합니다. 그래서 우리가 바로 모든 인민을 위해서 연대하고 실천하는 것을 바라고 있습니다.
Now, there are many difficulties in Asia, and one of them is primary health care. So I propose that set up the Asia Community Medical Center as Asian branch office of Latin American Medical School in North Korea. We wanted to give wider publicity to spirit of Cuba through this project. We need practice of solidarity and practice for all people.
Well, as we're meeting here today in a small town in New Zealand where I'm from, it's called Blackball, the Cuban ambassador to New Zealand, an exhibition of political cartoons by Gerardo Hernandez, one of the Cuban Five. This little town, Blackball, is in the heart of a coal mining region where a number of coal miners have just been told they're going to lose their jobs when a mine there closes. And this is an example of what's facing workers in New Zealand, where more of us are facing layoffs and unemployment as the worldwide economic crisis begins to make more of an impact there. Well, the Cuba Friendship Societies in New Zealand have been touring Gerardo's cartoons as part of our efforts to get out more information about the case of the Five and win new supporters. In Auckland, where I'm from, 200 people came to an opening of the exhibition. This is a large meeting for us. And we had a number of people, prominent people, give speeches about the case. And alongside Gerardo's cartoons, we had a Art to Aid the Cuban Five, where a whole number of artists donated artworks for sale to help us tour the exhibition to other centres.
As a member of the Communist League and the only delegate from the Australia-Cuba Friendship Societies around the country, I will try to give a brief picture of the work of the Cuban Solidarity Movement in Australia. One of the main activities this year for the ACFS groups has been the touring exhibition of the political cartoons by Gerardo Hernandez, one of the 5 Cuban political prisoners held in the United States jail since 1998. The exhibition has now been shown at galleries in every major city around the country. This is very important to reach out to new people with information about the Cuban Five and their dignified fight from behind bars, as well as information about the Cuban Revolution that they are being held hostage for defending. In the regional city of Albury-Wodonga, the opening was covered on primetime television. In Canberra, the national capital, the most recent showing was entitled The Funny Road to Freedom, a reference to the humour of Gerardo's cartoons. The opening drew 70 people. Showings in Perth, Melbourne and Brisbane drew many scores, if not hundreds more. In Sydney, the display of Gerardo's cartoons, entitled from the original Humour from My Pen, drew over 150 people for the opening and 620 more during the 4-week exhibition in an inner-city contemporary art gallery at the Vanishing Point. During this time, some 60 copies of this book were sold to visitors to the gallery. The Cuban Five, who they are, why they were framed, why they should be free, which is going to be a feature of a session tomorrow morning.
I represent Friends of Cuba Association from Malaysia. Interesting thing happened to me during lunch. Somebody asked me, what political belief do you hold? Are you a communist? I said no. Then why are you here supporting the Cuba movement, the solidarity with Cuba? So this is the roots of the problem. As I see it, there are lack of understanding. Knowledge is everywhere today, but knowledge without understanding won't get us anywhere. We have to understand, just because I am not a communist doesn't mean I cannot be a good friend or helping a good hand to my fellow Cuban, right? Just because I'm a Muslim doesn't mean I can sit beside my Christian friend and we can represent Malaysia as a delegate over here. So I would like to stress out in the short 5 minutes that were given to me, we need better understanding. That is what lacking in the world today. The Americans fail to understand the rest of the world. They fail to tolerate us, and the bottom line, they fail to accept us for what we are. If they were to do that, there won't be any trade embargo. There won't be any harsh movement toward the rest of the third country. You know, the media also need to play their roles in lifting the embargo, in freeing the 5 heroes. But unfortunately, the media is turning the other way around because bad news is good news. Nobody wants to read good news. Am I right? So if they show bombardment, they show war on TV, the rating is up. So we have to educate. We have to join forces. We have to make the people understand. We have to make people to learn to tolerate. We have to make the people accept our skin color, our religious belief, our political belief, and at the end of the day, we want a better world to live in. Thank you very much.
Now, we would be ending the plenary session for today, and it will resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Now we go in to the 2 commissions. 2 commissions would be announced as agreed. Thereafter, at 5 o'clock, His Excellency the President of Sri Lanka, Mahinda Rajapaksa, has given us an appointment for all foreign delegates and the National Preparatory Committee to meet His Excellency the President at his official residence at 5 o'clock. The commissions would deliberate until 4:45, and then we plan to proceed to the official residence of His Excellency the President.
invitation to participate in this 6th Asia-Pacific Regional Conference of Solidarity with Cuba, and the very warm hospitality that has been extended to us by, not only by the National Preparatory Committee for this conference, but by the delegates who are here today. I want to begin by saying that we were skeptical at first when the comrades of the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the People, ICAP, asked us to come and make a presentation of these 2 books here today. We said we're not from the region. And moreover, as we all know, the United States is the imperialist power above all others that is responsible for much of what has been inflicted on the peoples of the Asia and Pacific for decades and decades, including the wars that have been part of most of our lives, from Korea to Vietnam to Afghanistan today. That the peoples of Asia have paid a heavy price in blood to defeat. And we all know there's more struggle to come. But the comrades of ICAP responded that they thought we would be welcome. To some, that it would be useful to have people there who, as the kind introduction from Nagendra said, don't represent the government of the United States. And that Cuba has friends in the United States as well. And we agree and could not agree more with the words of Fidel Castro on the eve of just a few weeks really before the US invasion at the Bay of Pigs in 1961 and the tremendous victory of the Cuban people at Playa Girón 72 hours later. When in preparing the Cuban people for that coming invasion, which the whole world knew was on the agenda, it was just a question of when, Fidel told the people of Cuba, there will be a victorious revolution in the United States before a victorious counter-revolution in Cuba. The Cuban Five, who they are, why they were framed, and why they should be free. And Women in Cuba, the making of a revolution within the revolution, are truly complementary books. They're books that bring alive the Cuban Revolution today, not only its history, as important as that is.
These 2 books.
May I, on behalf of the Presidium and the conference, thank Mary Elisa Waters of the Pathfinder Publishers of the United States, and also for coming all this way to present the release of these books at the conference, and for the very inspiring and committed words that comes from the United States. To quote her, she stated that in the streets of the United States, the university campuses, journalists across the United States, and the general public continue to agitate for people of Cuba and for the release of the Cuban Five and for the ending of the economic blockade. Thereby joining us at this Asia-Pacific Conference has made a very important impact. Along with the conference, the release of the books will take a message across the world. Thank you once again, Alice, for all this work done.
Well, my presentation today follows the agenda of giving you an idea of the updating of the Cuban economic model. First of all, I would like to state primarily that in Cuba there are no political changes. There is no economic reform. We are only updating our economic model in order to continue the construction of the socialist economy that we want to construct. To take into account all matters that we took to see what we were going to do in the following years in Cuba, taking into account the situation that we had externally and internally, I will explain to you what were the main external and internal factors which we took into account. In the external factors, of course, number one was the US blockade, which has been there for over 50 years and which undoubtedly has intensified in the last few years. First of all, there's a prohibition of the use of the US dollar. You are all aware that the US dollar is the currency which is used mainly in the world for trade and financing. We cannot use the US trade dollar because of the US blockade.
In addition, comprehensive discussions were held on the topics of how to increase the information about Cuba in the media at the 4th Asia-Pacific Conference of Solidarity with Cuba held in Colombo in 2008, and on enhancing solidarity movement with Cuba through national and regional media networks at the 5th Asia-Pacific Conference held in Laos in 2010. As all these deliberations have brought about some important ideas and suggestions as to how media should be utilized more effectively in strengthening solidarity with Cuba, it was felt prudent to appraise these documents in order to assess how far they have been implemented and to address those areas that have been slacking in realization. So that was the kind of preamble that we decided on to look at these documents, understanding that they have come out with some good suggestions, ideas, and to see how far we have gone, and to strengthen and implement the areas that we have been lacking in realizing. It was felt that highlighting the achievements of socialist Cuba in economic, social, and cultural fields and Cuba's contribution towards consolidating the Bolivarian alternative project as an alternative to the Washington Consensus are important objectives of the media project.
Report of Commission on the economic blockade against Cuba must be lifted and Cuban 5 heroes must be free. After fruitful deliberations, the Commission observed that a considerable volume of public voice has been registered against the economic blockade on Cuba across the globe. The Commission is of the view that such protest action must be streamlined, for that with more concrete action is of the view that such protest action must be streamlined for the with more concrete action program. Sorry. More rhetoric or customary protest will not make much difference. A series of sincere and relentless actions are needed to strengthen the protest to pressurize the US administration to lift the half-century-old economic embargo on Cuba. The Commission is of the firm view that the economic blockade is against humanity and its native purpose and impact are equal as genocide. The economic blockade is an illegal act and recalled the concerned UN charters on right to peace, development, and security of a sovereign state. The US economic blockade is being used as a weapon to destroy socialist Cuba and instigate counter-revolution. The US blockade was meant to isolate Cuba, but the solidarity activities throughout the world has isolated the US administration and realizes that such action is against peace and tranquility. The overwhelming majority of international community has rejected the blockade and universally demands the revival of blockade against Cuba. The Asia-Pacific community salutes the Cuban people on their brave resistance on US mechanizations and ensure its continuous support. It was resolved that more action programs will be organized and will check out a special program focusing on campuses, exhibitions, awareness campaigns, seminars, and campaign through publication and social networking are to be organized to expose the inhumane agenda of USA and to hold high the spirit Cuban revolution and its political importance in the contemporary social orders. The Commission further observed that the unjust confinement of 5 heroes of Cuba is absolutely political. Therefore, more concerted efforts are required to strengthen the campaign to free the 5 heroes. Thank you very much.
The delegates of the 6th Asia-Pacific Conference for Solidarity with Cuba, representing 4 billion people inhabiting our region, vehemently condemn the inhuman and unlawful blockade imposed on Cuba, imposed by the United States.
release of the Cuban Five, and to respect Cuba's sovereign, independent right as a nation of the world to deal with all nations around. We know that over the last 20 years, the United Nations have adopted past resolutions calling for this change of the attitude and the decisions of the United States. UN General Assembly, that is represented by all our countries, represented by the world, is being ignored by the United States for its own hegemony. It is like calling all of us that we ignore all of you. Let us send the message, which should be very strong, that United States is not the world, but we are the world that is building today. It is very clear, listening to the economists, comrade who explained the construction, continuance of the socialist Cuba, the new proposals, the new programs that will raise the Cuban economy and the Cuban society to further levels, which means we of the world will also benefit, because Cuba's achievements have always been shared with the world. Whether it's health, research, my dear comrade minister, who represents the scientific ministry, has always explained in our country and brought benefit to the knowledge of Cuban scientific research that have been available to us. Honorable Tissavitarana, may I take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of the conference and all our friends who have been continue to flow information from Cuba's achievement to all our countries. We heard the East Timor delegation mentioning the great sacrifices and the contribution being made to the progress and development by the Cuban people by sharing their achievements. Therefore, what we call upon for the success of Cuba, for the protection of Cuba, is for all our countries which are today demanding a reasonable share in the progress of mankind. We know that the United States economy and the economies of the advanced countries are in crisis today. Unemployment is growing, economic slowdown has taken place, closure of enterprises, collapse of monetary institutions have become events of every day, which shows that the advanced, so-called advanced countries, part of managing their economies through the capitalist, multinational imposition of their dictates is collapsing. Let us not forget that every 12 or 7 years, 2 billion people add on to the world population. Every 12 years, the world population increases by 2 billion. The problems of the increasing populations, the problems of societies and countries keep changing, which means the resources left for this hegemony of the United States is decreasing at a rate unprecedented in the historic development that we face. Therefore, it is for all of us by supporting the Solidarity Conference, also to, as we all understand deeply, the commitment for social justice, progress, and development of our wealth for our societies. I do not want to take much time. If I may share something with my comrade from the Pathfinder, something she missed, if I may mention. We all call upon for a better world. Cuba, that has stood for environmental protection of the world at every conference, as we all faced opposition from the United States. United States throws not hundreds, not thousands, not 100,000s, but billions of biggest trash to the environment. That is destructing the environment for all of us. Therefore, new areas that have been identified in the struggle by our comrades of our countries in order to progress is more importantly shared by the Cuban people and the Cuban government led by President Raul Castro and the inspiring leader Fidel Castro, who lives today, to further this inspiration to all of us. On behalf of the preparatory committee, once again I thank all those who helped us, and if I may extend some extra word of thanks, it is to Her Excellency, the Cuban Ambassador Guevara, who not only helped us, who is due to retire and return home to Cuba in the next 2-3 days. I thank you, Your Excellency, for all the help given to the success of this most international conference, and also for all support given to our country. Once again, we thank the Vietnamese delegation for accepting the venue for the 7th Asia-Pacific Conference. I would conclude my speech by saying once again, Viva la Cuba. Viva la Revolución de Cuba.